Welcome back to Making Money Matter, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson. I've asked Greg Hall to come and join us today. Why? Because Greg's the Managing Director and CEO of Alligator Energy, and the ASX code is AGE. And one of my favorite commodities, aside from gold, of course, is uranium. Why? It's clean. It's all about energy. And what Alligator Energy are doing is they've got projects in South Australia, Northern Territory, and a little bit of an interest over there in Europe. But I'm not going to tell you the story. I'm going to ask Greg to do that. Greg, welcome to Making Money Matter. We're going to make uranium matter today. How are you?
Thank you kindly, Kerry. Nice to see you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, always good to see you, Greg. This is the first time we've spoken on Making Money Matter. So for our audience, why don't you just give us the background of who you are?
So Alligator Energy started life as a uranium explorer in the last boom time, about 12 or 13 years ago. Alligator Rivers was the focus, Arnhem Land in particular. The original team had great expertise in this area, and we continue with that expertise, and it's still an important exploration source for us because of some of the success we've had in intersections and discoveries. But then we decided to change the business bit in 2018. We went out and looked for projects to acquire. We acquired the Samphire Uranium Project, which has an existing resource in South Australia, the Big Lake Uranium Project in the Cooper Basin, and I'll explain later why that's an interesting greenfields play, and an opportunity to pick up with some nickel and cobalt in Northern Italy, which I'll chat briefly about. But our focus is uranium and moving into some of the energy minerals as we look broader on our tenements, but uranium is definitely the focus for us. And we've pulled together both the resources being cash and the team around that to help take, in particular, Samphire forward.
Okay, I'm going to talk about cash and funding and all that sort of stuff in a moment, but just to make sure that our audience understand, the Samphire project is in South Australia. Big Lake is also South Australia. You've then got, what's the one up in the Northern Territory? Alligator.
The Alligator Rivers region is the Alligator Rivers Uranium Project, or province, as we call it. And Narberth North is our latest big project up there, a package of 11 tenements.
Okay.
So that's the focus up there.
All right. Let's start off, if you wouldn't mind, with Samphire, which is down in South Australia. That's the most advanced project. Is that where the focus is at the moment?
No, it certainly is. That's where we're putting a lot of our team's effort and our dollars. Samphire, the uranium project there, was discovered by Uranium SA, a group operating through the year 2000s and into early 2010s and 11s. And they discovered an in situ or embedded sands about 60 to 70 meters below the surface containing uranium, ideal for in situ recovery. They did the basic resource development work and brought that forward. Now, we've taken it on. We've lifted the cut-off grade to make it amenable to ISR in the current economic times, and we've been doing additional drilling to enhance that resource. A scoping study, which has shown the first pass economics are good, and we wanted to do the scoping study as early as possible to make sure we're spending money on the right thing.
Okay.
And that's of value to us. Now we're enhancing the resource further. We're updating that scoping study with a slightly higher production rate, and we'll have that announced later in the year. An exploration target range, because not only the main Blackbush deposit is of interest, but there's a smaller deposit and a lot of known channels over 7 kilometres. And the good thing about these new ISR type projects is they start small and they grow. Beverley Mine in South Australia started at 1.2 million pound a year. The sort of production rate will be. It's now running at 4.5 million pound a year, and they've discovered 3 more mines and deposits around it. So Samphire presents a great opportunity in a state that's approved 5 uranium mines, 4 of them ISR, all of which have operated. So that's why we're advancing that at the pace we are. And it's really now at the early to mid development stage is what we call it, if you like.
So an interesting time, but I want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, why did Uranium SA want to divest of it? How did you pick it up? Give us the sort of the rationale. How did you come across it, and why did it pique your attention?
Well, Uranium SA, like all of us who were involved in uranium back in that time through to 2011, of course, when the tsunami hit Japan, the uranium price dived. That's really what meant there was about a 10-year doldrum period for uranium. Uranium SA changed its name and often did other things. They spun out the Samphire project as an unlisted but public company, so it was in limbo. We acquired it in late 2020. Now we've had our eye on it for a while, but nonetheless we acquired it at perfect timing, because in December 20, 2 months later, was when the Biden administration in particular declared that they are putting full support behind nuclear, and that's the first time Democrat government in the United States has ever supported nuclear.
Amazing.
So you now had bipartisan support in the US for nuclear power going forward. That's what generated an increasing interest in uranium equities at the time, and the spot price hadn't even moved. It was still in the sort of high 20s, low 30s, but that started to move then in sort of April, May. So that was the takeoff of the market. So in general, we purchased it at the right time. It's got it had a broader overall resource. We've tightened it back to the resource that's of interest to us in situ recovery technique, which is solution mining technique. You don't mine the rock, you drill a series of holes in a pattern with a central well where you extract the solution by dissolving the uranium with a slightly acidic water. The groundwater is hypersaline, but the solution mining still works. So it's a great opportunity for us to take a project forward. The other important point about in situ recovery mining for your listeners and viewers is it's a cheaper form of mining in terms of operating costs, but it's also cheaper in capital, because you're not doing a major mining fleet. So our scoping study had a capital cost of 130 million Australian, but that incorporated 40% contingency and escalation factors.
Wow.
You always, from scoping stage, that's what you should put on it, by the way.
Okay.
The estimated cost from that scoping study was $30 a pound, all-in sustaining costs for the uranium, and that's at a time when the spot price is currently at 58. So it's an effective form of mining, and that's why 60% of the world's uranium was mined by in situ recovery up until 2022. Now you're seeing some restart of some of the underground mines and open pit mines, but up until 22, when the uranium price was flat, in situ recovery is a dominant method of mining. So it's the right size for a company of our size. It's a proven technique. It's the regulators in South Australia understand it. We've got very good porosity in the ground, very good bench scale test work done, and we're working towards an in situ recovery trial in the first part of next year. So our approval documents for that are now with the department here in the state, and they're just coming up for public submissions shortly. So that's to do that in situ trial. Now, based on that success, if we have, we've had repeatable bench scale tests which have gone well. Based on the in situ trial, with having the same sort of success, we'll move straight into a feasibility study on the project in 24. So it really is one that we can move reasonably rapidly, remembering you are subject to approvals for each stage, not just the drilling and the exploration, but also the trial work and then any significant work on the ground. So we've already started a lot of the approval processes early. We've already got some historical flora fauna surveys, radiation surveys and those. We're now enhancing those and getting that work done on the assumption we're going to have good field trial and go straight into feasibility. We put out the scoping study results early this year, and on the basis of that, we're about 4 to 4.5 years away from production.
Okay.
And that's realistic, because even with a regulatory regime that's familiar with uranium, a public that's familiar with uranium in South Australia, it's still about a 3-year approval process at least.
Okay.
So that's why we're initiating that now.
So you're saying about a 3-year to go through all the approvals and to go through all that, and then what, about another 2 years to get yourself into production post?
Yeah, 18 months is the sort of construction time for a plant of this size, both the wellfield development and the construction of the plant, and then you're ramping up production then. So that's the time frame.
Okay, so with this ISR, as people like to call it, in situ recovery, better cost-wise, slightly easier to do. Is it also more environmentally friendly? Because what I'm thinking about is going forward from a macro point of view on that marketing side, are people that are wanting the uranium going to be looking at ISR more than other projects?
Well, it is cost effective. but it does depend on some things such as grade to a certain extent, etc., and location. So our estimated cost of $30 per pound all-in sustaining, that includes ongoing wellfield drilling, but separate to the capital for the plant being constructed. That's fairly typical of ISR costs. You have some that are in the mid-20s, you have some that are in the low 30s. So it's fairly typical of that. Now, notwithstanding that, if you're starting a project from scratch and you have capital put in, my rule of thumb is that you need 1.5 times your cost base as a minimum price to go forward. But in the essence of this, with the uncertainties in financing that you have up and down in the market, you really want more than that. So we've used a $65 price in our scoping study, 65 US per pound. Now, long-term contracts have been set sort of in the high 50s, and at market-related prices being predicted to go into the 60s. So the long-term contracts are getting close to that. And so we think over the next 2 to 3 years, and it really will start the process. We've already been talking to nuclear utilities, by the way, already been meeting with them.
Good.
But we haven't put any bids in on requests for tenders or anything for long-term supply until we've done the field trial early next year. But certainly, we know the interest is there because we've had sometimes 3 meetings with different utilities over the last 2 years, and there's great interest in new supply coming on in 27, 28. That's what they're after. So all of that adds up to the right time, right place, right sort of deposit, right cost base, and it's the right size project for our sort of company and our experience base. We've been employing and building up the experienced ISR team in our group to be able to manage this. So myself, I've managed underground uranium mines, I've bit uranium mines, I've dealt with uranium markets and marketed for uranium nuclear fuel. But our team now, under Andrea Marsland-Smith, who is one of the senior managers at Heathgate, has really got the expertise in situ recovery mining, and we're expanding that all the time.
How important is it to get the right team in this sort of ISR process? Is that key?
Yeah, well, it's paramount. I mean, you asked earlier about, is it lower impact environmentally, etc. It does. You don't physically mine the ground, you don't crush or grind the grounds, and you don't have waste dumps, you don't have a tailings dam. So it's got lesser impact on the surface. You do a temporary use of surface, you have a relatively small size plant, but then you have pipes that go out to the holes that you do for solution mining, and they last about 12 to 18 months on the ground, then you reclaim it. Okay, so it's not a permanent fixture on the ground. But of course, you're dealing in a groundwater regime, and in South Australia, it's not fresh water, it's saline water of different degrees. But 2 things, you've got to make sure, you've got to show the regulators, you've got to show the public, show the pastoralists that you're not impacting that groundwater long term. You don't draw water out or put water in, you recirculate the water. And for every 10,000 litres we recirculate, we put 2 litres of acid solution in to make it slightly more acidic, which dissolves the uranium back off the sand grains. And that's as simple as it gets. It's like
is it a closed? Sorry, Greg, is it a closed loop, or
yes, it's a closed loop.
It's a closed loop system.
No, it's a closed loop. What you do is you draw out slightly more water than you allow back in, so that you have a negative pressure within the ring, and that keeps the solution moving towards the center extraction well, which is what you want. So you want the ring of holes where you put in solution down, it's just going by gravity, and then you draw it out in the middle. So that extracts the uranium that you've measured is in that ring. Then you have another one here, another one here, another one here, another one here, and that's the well field, if you like. So you're doing that for the simple recovery reasons. You don't want the solution going off in the distance, you want to recover it out of the well. But then what you also do is at the end of an area of a well field, you continue to circulate water without acid just to get the water balance going back right. And then you have to do, in fact, we've already done this, and all ISR companies do this. You do a huge amount of independent technical work on the hydrogeology to say, how fast does the water move? There is a neutralization aspect to all groundwaters and all sands. So you've got some pyrite, you've got calcium, you've got things. So as any residual acid gets used up as it moves through the ground.
Got it.
So all ISR mines have to show that the groundwater returns to its pure background state after a period of time. And you have to show that also by drilling holes to show how it changes over time. So in essence, that can be as short a distance as 30 metres, 35 to 50, like it is in ours. In some of the ISR projects to the east, it might be 100 to 200 metres, but you're not allowed to have any impact on groundwater outside your lease boundary. Zero. Right? So it all has to be contained in your release. And after you finish mining, you have to show that there is going to be no impact outside that lease boundary at all. So it's an important part of the business. And so hydrogeology expertise is so important. We have a very experienced ISR hydrogeologist, but we're recruiting a graduate right now because you need to keep that expertise moving through the process. So that's one thing. It's an important environmentally to manage that. The other key point is that where in situ recovery would have a detriment, if there's one, you are estimating by drilling where the ore is. You're estimating what you're getting out, and what you get out is what you get out. In general, based on history of this sort of mining, you recover about 70% of the uranium. It's very hard to get more than 75, 80. And that's just the fact that you're not digging it up and processing every ton. The solutions move through the porous compacted sands, and they are just sands, and pick up uranium as it goes, but it's not perfect. We always get a little bit of channeling, preferential flow, that sort of thing. And that means you don't quite get all the uranium. So it's cheap, it's effective, it's got very little environmental impact, but you don't necessarily recover all the uranium out of that. And so uranium just stays there as solid particles around the sand grains, like it was been millions of years.
That was actually really interesting because I didn't understand fully how the in situ recovery works. And it's, gosh, humans can be very clever. Are there any challenges down at Samphire, like with pastoralist or any, where is it? Talk to us about the land and how you're dealing with the pastoralists, for example.
Well, it's on the Samphire Flats adjacent, just to the south of Whyalla, 20 kilometres south. And these are an area of 4 or 5 kilometres in from the Spencer Gulf to where it goes to an area where the sands run out. So these are buried sands, 70 to 80 metres deep, and containing a hypersaline groundwater. And it runs out, it doesn't keep going to the west. But it's deeper than the Gulf. So the Gulf in that area is 20 metres deep. That's all. It's a very shallow up there, that part of the Gulf. So the sands actually go right underneath and come out the other side. But the key thing, of course, is when you're developing a new project in any area, other land users want to say, what's it going to do to me? How's it going to impact me? So we have a land access agreement for the main Blackbush deposit on the main pastoral list we're operating on now, and that's in place. The other landowner to the south we want to explore, we're engaging with him so he understands their business. Neither of them are enamoured we're there. Their business is pastoral, but they know, and in South Australia, as in other states, there's the ability to have overlapping leases. You have pastoral lease, a mining lease, an oil and gas lease, a hydrogen lease, a renewable lease. So in other words, all these activities can occur. And in fact, these pastoralists, there is already renewable companies engaged with them for potential wind farms and things as well. So while they're not enamoured with it, they know that we can interact together. And we've been working very well with our main pastoralist on making sure when he's lambing, we're not on the property. Right. Take our drillers off, we don't do anything. We work in and around what he's doing and make sure that not only that, our environmental manager comes from that region. He knows the bush density, he knows what we can do to make sure we recover well. So we're trying to work and show the pastoralists that we can actually improve the rangeland we're on once we've drilled and once we've done extraction, because we're showing it now. We started the rehabilitation of some of the old drilling even before we finished acquiring the project. That's the most important thing you can show to a pastoralist, is you respect the land. So absolutely. We've been doing that. In fact, we won a Premier's Award here in South Australia last year because of the way we're operating, even during resource and exploration drilling. We are fencing, we are rehabilitating, we're going back to double the bush density that was there.
Wow.
And that's what we're making work. So there's some pastoralists that are not enamoured with us. There's some which have got agreements. We're working with others. But the Whyalla region itself, Whyalla is an iron ore mining town and steel making town. They're fairly familiar with these sort of projects because a lot of companies out of Whyalla support Olympic Dam. work up at Heathgate, Carrapateena, those sort of projects. So there's a good acceptance of what we're trying to do there. But we know it's a uranium mining project. People are going to ask questions. They want to understand. We've had open days up in Whyalla, and we're continuing to do them right through this process. So there's always going to be people that are unsure of what we're doing and not enamored with it, and we make sure that we are open to those discussions.
Well, and I think I should probably get you on again, because I want to focus some more on that. But Greg, we're not got all the time in the world, and I really want to talk about Alligator River, but also Big Lake. Can we just stay in South Australia for a moment? Because I know Samfire's the big focus. What are you doing at Big Lake?
So Big Lake Uranium is an opportunity that was brought to us by two geologists who had studied the world and said, look, most of the big in-situ recovery uranium fields are associated with hydrocarbon basins. Kazakhstan produces 40% of the world's uranium, is an oil and gas basin with sediments above it. You've got Wyoming is gas and coal, big ISR producer in uranium. And Texas is oil and gas, and that's in-situ recovery uranium. The relationship here is that if you have sediments that contain groundwaters with dissolved uranium, one of the reasons uranium can drop out and solidify, become a deposit, is it reduces and it encompasses or hits a reductant, and that reductant can be carbon or hydrocarbon. So lignite, gas, oil, something. So no one has had a decent look over the Cooper Basin. Here's the biggest, one of the biggest inland hydrocarbon basins in Australia. Been producing gas for 70 years and oil for almost as long. And there's been one company drilled a few holes. There's gamma spikes in the sediments above the basin. So they drilled to 2,000 meters for oil and gas. We're talking about the top 300. Okay. And there are some gamma spikes that show, well, there's something there. Then there's a company that drilled holes 10 or 12 years ago, found 300 part per million uranium. It's sort of about cut-off grade uranium, but in narrow bands.
Yep.
So we've got a sedimentary basin geologist employed who doesn't have uranium experience so far, but we want him to look at what's the data that's been gathered here. It's all publicly available. Let's look at the seismic data, the other data. What work do we need to do to see, are there traps where uranium solutions might have formed, solidified out, and therefore there are potential economic deposits. So it's pure greenfield. It's almost like a punt on the fact that this model setting might have these traps. But if you find one, there are more.
Absolutely. So you know what? You just got me quite excited. That's greenfield. That
greenfield opportunity, pure greenfield. We've got the first Indigenous agreements now in place. We are about to do a full clearance on our first drilling in the coming 6 or 8 weeks, and then we'll be up there doing our first drilling to correlate first what's the seismic telling us with, are there traps or channels that are present? And so that's the first work. So this is really a 2 to 3 year program to see, is there the right traps? We might have the right model but the wrong location. We might have to look elsewhere in the basin, but nonetheless, we're putting a bit of effort into that. It's a great opportunity. And look, as everyone knows, you find a brand new ore body or a brand new field, that's a game changer for a company. So that's what we're trying to do.
That's why I'm getting a little bit excited here, Greg, because I didn't understand, quite frankly, what Big Lake is. And what you're saying is Kazakhstan, which produces 40% of the world's uranium, that's where it sits. It sits in a big basin like the Cooper Basin here in Australia.
Yeah, all the sediments are associated with those basins. They can be sitting beside them, over the top or nearby. But in general, there's this correlation that occurs. It's greenfields. It could have nothing, or the model could be wrong, or there's just not the right accumulations. But the sediments are the same that host the Beverley 4 Mile Honeymoon deposits. So let's see if there's been an accumulation.
Last question on Big Lake before we move on. Anyone done any sort of work like this over at the Cooper Basin, or are you the first ones to go, you know what, there might be something here?
No, there's a company, as I said, drilled around some of the oil and gas wells that found a gamma spike, and they did find these narrow bands of 300 ppm part per million uranium, which is, 250 is the cutoff grade we use at Samfire. So we know there's uranium present in some of the system. We know there are gamma spikes. We know the sediments host uranium elsewhere in South Australia, 200-300 kilometres to the south. We know there's hot granites at depth because geothermal power was being looked at up there some 15 years ago. So it's got the right ingredients. Let's see whether the model works.
All right. let's get on to Alligator River up there in the Northern Territory just quickly. Are you doing much up there at the moment?
We are. We've got a significant drilling program on our Narberlek North project. So we've got three main project areas, the Beatrice and Tin Camp Creek, and then Narberlek North. In the past, up until 2018, we were working on the southern projects, which are overlain by these barren sandstones. And that's, of course, what makes up that beautiful escarpment you see in Kakadu, is the sandstones. But unfortunately, looking through those, because they extend greater into Arnhem Land, is difficult. Ranger and Jabiluka to the west, the sandstone's been worn away, essentially. So they were visible on the surface. They were big projects and they were well explored. The Rangers had 250 million pound mined out of it or so. Jabiluka's 350 million pound, the biggest undeveloped project in the world, pretty well. So what is there in Arnhem Land further to the east? So we've looked at techniques looking under the sandstone. We've done some drilling. We've found some intersections of uranium, but haven't jagged, pulling together a big deposit. We have a small deposit at Caramel, 6.5 million pound. That's not enough to be economic.
Yeah.
Other companies have found small deposits. Angulali, which is now which is now Deep Yellow, 25 million pound. And DevEx are currently drilling just to the south of our new project. Now, Narberlek North, our new project to the north, and I say new, it was granted in early 20 just as COVID hit. So we were not able to get on the ground. We did a first little program last year. By the time we got camp and drillers and things, it was only short. This year, we established ourselves in late May. We're doing RAB and auger drilling to look at the underlying geology, because there's no sandstone over this area. It's been weathered away.
Yep.
But there is a high weathered profile. So we've got to go through that to really look at the geology. So we're doing some relatively cheap drilling spaced on tracks or on lines that we can determine to see what the geology is. We know the basic structures in some areas because there's been a lot of work done by previous companies for their overall structures, but it's all a matter of finding one of the Ranger ore bodies, for example, at 100 million pound is 80 metres wide. If you drill outside that 25 metres, you'll get indications. You drill outside that 100 metres, you don't see any indication.
Nothing.
So
yeah.
You're targeting something that could be 80 metres wide but last for 20 years. Okay, so it's that sort of thing we're looking for up there, those significant size deposits. And it's a good 2 to 3 year program, the same as Big Lake. We've got a significant spend this year of between $2 to $3 million to really have a good look at these overlying weather profile, what's below that in terms of the rock types. Link that to IP geophysics we're doing this year, historical EM geophysics done, and other structures that are known about by both NT Survey and Geoscience Australia work. So there's a real data gathering exercise going on up there, and we're starting to get some targets. So we're starting to indicate where do we think we're going to drill either late this year or early next year when we actually look at some targets.
Okay, drilling early next year. Give me 1 minute, because there's an optionality here that I don't want to ignore, I don't want you to ignore, which is Italy over there.
Yeah.
1 minute on up there in Piedmont. Why have you got it?
Well, we picked this up when uranium was in the doldrums in 2017-18. It's an area above the African crustal plate where northern Italy's moving over the Alps, where there was multiple small high-grade nickel mines run during World War II by Mussolini. At the end of the war, they just stopped. No one did any more work. No one's even drilled a hole in this. But it's a 30-kilometre strike length that we've got tenements mostly in, with nickel showings, 17 nickel showings at 0.5% or higher. It's in the foothills of the Alps, so it's rough terrain, but it's accessible, and there's a mining pedigree there in the community, which is of interest. So we've done enough work to say this looks interesting, but we don't want to put a lot of dollars in. We're looking for a partner. So we've done some geophysics. We've got some other prospects, but we're looking for a partner to come in and evaluate with us. But the European Union, as you know, is very interested in homegrown minerals within its borders. And now Italy's starting to follow suit.
Oh, I think that's going to be very interesting as well. Greg, I'm sorry, we've run out of time, but before I let you go, wrap it all up if you like, and give us 3 reasons people should be sitting up and taking notice of Alligator Energy right now as I talk to you.
Well, look, number one, we're in the right commodity. Uranium is picked up again. It really is on a strong curve because of the nuclear power and the modern nuclear industry, in particular small modular reactors, being seen as a link to clean power in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, the Samphire in situ recovery. In situ recovery is the right style of project for a company our size. And not only that, it's both proven within South Australia and regulated well within South Australia. So that's a key thing. The third is our news flow. We raised the funds, we built the team, and now we're on the ground with not only resource drilling and enhanced resource late this year, and then a scoping study update, the field trial, which will be on the ground at Samphire early next year. So our news flow coming up in the coming 12 to 18 months is going to be increased dramatically.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Lots of news flow, and they have the funding. I think you've got about 18.5 mil in the bank. So they're not going to go out to the market. They've got the funding to be able to do the drilling, but it's an interesting time, which is why I asked Greg to come on today, because I want you to watch. There's a lot of news coming out. Check them out. ASX code is AGE. Greg Hall, thank you so much for joining me today on Making Money Matter, or as I should say, Making Uranium Matter.
Thank you very much, Kerry. It's been a pleasure.